Hi, it's Mr. Bennett. In today's video, what we need to talk about is we need to talk about biomes. Now, the idea of the biome is that there are places on the planet that have very similar climates. And if two places that are on different parts of the planet have a very similar climate, you would expect to find similar plants and animals living in that area, because I taught you in the last video that the most important thing that affects what living things live in an area is the climate. Let me give you an example. Here's two areas that have a very similar climate. And if you look at them, you can see that they look pretty similar. Well, what you're looking at here on the left, this is a rainforest in Brazil. This is the Amazon rainforest. Here on the right, this is a rainforest in Vietnam, on the other side of the planet. Now, you can see that the plants look pretty similar here because these two areas both have a very similar climate. They're both very hot, and they both get a lot of rain. And because they both have a similar climate, similar plants can live there. And similar plants are going to attract similar animals that are going to eat those plants. So, the idea of the biome is if you have two places on the planet that have a similar climate, you can expect to find certain plants and animals living in that biome. Another example of a biome. Here we've got a grassland biome right here. One grassland over here, another grassland over here. You can see that they're pretty similar to each other. Where are these two found? Well, this one's in Russia. This one's in Nebraska, here in the United States. So you can see that these two look very similar to each other because they have basically the same climate, kind of dry and gets really, really cold in the winter. That makes it so only grass can grow there. And because only grass can grow there, because of the climate, they end up looking very similar, and similar types of animals live in that area. So that is the idea of the biome. Now, in this unit, we're going to learn about 8 major biomes, 8 major ones. Now, the idea of the biome is you can really break it down. You can get really, really super specific in your biomes. Most textbooks talk about between 7 and 9 different biomes. Here in Utah, we're going to talk about 8 biomes, but each of these biomes could be broken down into smaller biomes. The 8 we're going to learn about are tropical rainforest, tropical dry forest, tropical savanna, desert, temperate grassland, temperate woodland and shrubland. An old term for this one is chaparral. Sometimes you still see that in some old books. Temperate forest, northwestern coniferous forest, boreal forest. Another name for that is taiga, and tundra. We're going to learn about all 8 of these. You're going to have to know all 8 of these biomes. You're going to have to be able to recognize all 8 of these biomes, and you're going to have to know what the climate is like for all 8 of these biomes. So as we go through all these, make sure that you pay particular attention to the climate for these 8 biomes. Are they hot? Are they cold? Do they have both? Are they wet? Are they dry? Those are the important things you're going to have to know about these biomes. So the first one we're going to talk about is, let's talk about the rainforest, the tropical rainforest, commonly also known as the jungle. So what are the characteristics of the tropical rainforest? Well, first off, constant hot temperatures. This red line here represents the temperature in a tropical rainforest. You can see it never drops. The temperature is always right up around 90 degrees. Cool day in a tropical rainforest, it's only 85. Other characteristic you've got going on with the tropical rainforest is lots of rain. If you look at this graph, it shows how much precipitation it gets in millimeters. 200 millimeters is about roughly 80 inches. So in the month of February, this rainforest got 80 inches of rain. In March, it's getting like 79. So a tropical rainforest will get more rain in a month than Logan will in 10 years. So lots and lots and lots of rain is the big thing. So warm with lots of rain. That's what you got going on in tropical rainforest. The dominant plants you see there, you see a lot of broadleaf plants. You see a lot of ferns. Whenever you see ferns, you know you got a lot of moisture in an area, and you're going to see vines and so forth in the area. Dominant animals, herbivores, lots of things that eat plants, lots of insects, reptiles, and amphibians. Insects, reptiles, and amphibians pretty much dominate the tropical rainforest. You'll find some mammals in there. You'll find some birds. You'll find like monkeys and parrots and stuff like that. But you find more insects, reptiles, and amphibians than anything else. How many? The reason why we make such a big deal about the tropical rainforest is there are more species of animals that live in the tropical rainforest than the rest of the planet combined. Now, tropical rainforests make up less than 10% of the Earth's surface, but it has approximately 75% of the Earth's species. So lots of animals live in tropical rainforests because there's so many plants making so much food for them to eat. The next biome we need to talk about is the tropical dry forest. Now, we still got the word tropical, so this is a place that is always hot, but it's also dry, so that's going to be something that's a little bit different from a tropical rainforest. The characteristic of a tropical dry forest is you have constant hot temperatures. If you look at the climate graph here, you can see we're always up around 90 degrees. And then we have periods of the year where it's crazy dry. November, December, January, February, March, super dry. And then we have periods of the year where it's crazy wet, where we're getting 5-6 feet of rain in 1 month. And so this picture here shows you what a tropical dry forest can look like. During certain times of the year, yeah, it looks really, really dry. But on other times of the year, specifically the wet season, it's going to look just like a tropical rainforest. And so a tropical dry forest has the same temperature as a rainforest, but it doesn't have the constant precipitation like a rainforest does. It only gets precipitation a couple of months out of the year. And that's the big difference between these two biomes. Now, the dominant plants in the area, you're still going to find a lot of broadleaf trees because it's very warm, but you're going to find different plants that are more drought resistant. The plants that live in the rainforest, they don't have to be drought resistant at all because they're going to get an inch of rain every day. They don't have to worry about conserving water. But the plants that live in a tropical dry forest, they have to be able to live through these 3 months where it's going to be very, very dry. And they're going to have to be drought resistant to make it through that time. Dominant animals you're going to find in the area, this is where most of the world's tigers live, is in a tropical dry forest. You'll find elephants, you'll find monkeys, lots of insects, lots of reptiles. And you see I've got a picture of India. India is a classic example of a tropical dry forest. Most of the country of India is a tropical dry forest. And so that's why animals from India are a great example of animals that live in a tropical dry forest. The next biome we're going to talk about is the tropical savanna. So once again, tropical, this is an area that isn't going to have a winter. It's always going to be hot. The classic picture of the savanna is the grasslands of Africa with a giraffe or a lion running through it, so on and so forth. Now the characteristics of the savanna is you have constant hot temperatures. This climate graph down here shows you the climate for savanna. So once again, we're always around 90 degrees. We have a dry season and a wet season. But you may be thinking, well, how's this different from a tropical dry forest? Take a look at it. During the rainy season in the savanna, we're getting 300 millimeters of rain a month. During the rainy season in a tropical dry forest, we're getting 3 times that, 1,000 millimeters of rain in a month. So that's the big difference between the two. They are very similar. They both have a dry season, they both have a wet season. The difference is a tropical dry forest gets enough rain to support trees. Tropical savanna, we still have a rainy season, but even during that rainy season, we're not going to get enough rain to support trees. That's a big thing about biomes. Once it starts to dry out, you lose the trees and they get replaced by grasses. Grasses can survive on less rain or less water than a tree can. So as things dry out, the trees go bye-bye and then the grasses take over. And that's what we really got going on coming from this, a tropical dry forest, to a tropical savanna. We have the same hot temperatures, but we lost some precipitation, and that's why the grasses took over and the trees went bye-bye. Dominant plant in the area is obviously going to be grasses and shrubs. That's what we're going to find in the savanna. And the dominant animals in a tropical savanna, basically, if it's in the movie The Lion King, it's on the savanna. Elephants, zebra, giraffe, lions, all these fun things, hyenas, are things that you're going to find in a tropical savanna. These are the classic animals that live there. The next biome we need to talk about is we need to talk about the desert. And this is a picture of the Gobi Desert found in Mongolia. You all remember my story about the Gobi Desert, the desert I will never forget. Now, the characteristic of a desert, of course, is they are dry. Any area of the earth that gets less than 25 centimeters, which is the equivalent of 10 inches of precipitation a year, counts as a desert. Now, yesterday you guys did the climate activity for Utah, and you found there are lots of places in Utah that get less than 10 inches of precipitation. So most of the state of Utah is actually a desert. Now, one thing about a desert is they can be hot, or they can be cold, or they can be both. Here, the Gobi Desert, you can see the snow. It's obviously a cold place. It gets really cold there during the winter time. Saudi Arabia, the Sahara Desert, it can get up to be 130 degrees there. So hot and cold really doesn't play a role in if something is a desert or not. The key characteristic is that it is dry. And if you look at this climate graph down here, you can see we get almost no precipitation throughout the entire year. Now, this climate graph also shows you that this desert at times gets up to almost 90 degrees, and at other times it's down to 32 degrees. So it gets very hot and very cold. The key thing for a desert, once again, is that they are dry. The dominant plants that live there are going to be mainly cactus and then short-lived grasses and flowers, things that live for 2 weeks and die. Because if there does happen to be rain there, it's not going to last very long. And so the plants need to be able to grow, reproduce before they die and the water runs out in about 2 weeks. Dominant animals you're going to find a lot of reptiles that live in deserts. Reptiles do better than mammals do when it's dry. You're going to find lots of insects and arachnids and so forth that live in the desert. And then you're going to find things like kangaroos live in the desert, obviously in Australia. You're going to find things like bobcat and coyotes and so forth, and birds that are going to live in the desert. So those are the characteristics of the desert. The main thing to keep in mind, they are dry. The next biome we need to talk about is the temperate grassland. Now, if you ever see the word temperate, that means you have 4 seasons. This is a place that has winter, spring, summer, fall. Tropical, it's summer year-round. It's never cold. It's just summer. That's what you got going on. You have no seasons going on there. Any place where you see temperate, that's a place that's going to have a winter, a fall, a spring, and a summer. So a temperate grassland, this is what it looks like. And a temperate grassland is going to be places like Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, North and South Dakota. The Great Plains in the United States are your examples of a temperate grassland. The characteristics of a temperate grassland is the savanna is mainly made up of grass, but the big difference between a temperate grassland and a savanna, tropical savanna, is a temperate grassland has a winter, whereas the savanna does not. And then the other thing about a temperate grassland is the temperatures and so forth are can be kind of similar to a desert, but the big difference between a grassland and a desert is a grassland gets just a little bit more precipitation, but not enough to grow trees. So that's kind of the zone that a grassland is in. It's got more precip than a desert, but not quite enough precipitation to grow trees. And that's what makes them different from some of our forests. The dominant plants, grass, 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 and more grass is what's going to grow in this area. We got enough water to grow grass, unlike a desert, but we don't have enough water to grow a lot of trees, unlike some of the forests we're going to talk about later on. Dominant animals that live in the area, this is going to be things like wolves, bison, pronghorn, bears can even live here, prairie dogs, black-footed ferrets, and so on and so forth. Lots of things that are fast live in the temperate grasslands. And so that's our next example of a biome. Our next biome we need to talk about is a little bit trickier. It's called temperate woodland or shrubland. And an old term sometimes, as I mentioned, you see for this one is chaparral. Now this is one that can be a little bit difficult for students to get their heads around what makes it different. Basically, what a temperate woodland is it's a grassland with a little bit warmer winters and maybe just a little bit more precipitation. As far as climate goes, the chaparral or the temperate woodland is going to be very similar to the grassland, but the winters are warmer. If you check out the temperature graph we got going on right here, they top off in the 90s during the summer, and then it doesn't get any colder than about 45 degrees in the winter. Whereas the grasslands, the Midwest in the United States, can get really, really, really freaking cold. I was in Fargo, North Dakota once when it was 55 below zero. So grasslands can get really cold. Temperate woodland really doesn't get that cold. It's a little bit milder. You only really find temperate woodlands close to the ocean. So like Southern California is an example of a temperate woodland, and then all the way around the Mediterranean over in Europe. That's an example of a temperate woodland. Now, because it's a little bit warmer and a little bit more precipitation, we can grow shrub-like stuff, like bushes can grow in this area. Whereas in a grassland, bushes can't really grow because there's not enough precipitation and it's too cold. But in the temperate woodland, it's just warm enough and gets just enough precipitation that bushes and shrubs can grow. So the dominant thing, shrub-like plants are what's going to grow in your temperate woodland. Dominant animals, you can find all these different animals. These are animals that live in Southern California that you can find in the temperate woodland. So everything from bear and deer down to rabbits and skunks and raccoons and coyotes and wolves and foxes and so forth, all can live in the temperate woodland. Our next biome is the temperate forest. So once again, we've got temperate, so we've got 4 seasons. We've got winter, spring, summer, and fall. And the temperate forest is a type of forest that you really only find on the eastern side of the United States, because these are forests that are made up entirely of trees that have broad leaves. You guys know most of the forests here in Utah are made up of pine trees. You find a few quaking aspens and so forth, but the dominant tree is going to be a pine tree. Well, when you go to the forest back on the east side of the United States, you don't see a lot of pine trees. Most of the things you see are more like oaks and beeches and beech trees and so forth that have very all broad leaves. Now, the reason why they can pull this off is because it's a little bit wetter than what we've got going on here. That the forests on the east side of the United States get more precipitation than the ones we do on the west side of the United States get. So here's the climate graph for the temperate forest. You can see that we have a definite warm period, definite cold period, but we have pretty much constant precipitation throughout. That these temperate forests are getting 1 to 2 to even 3 or 4 inches of rain every month, which is a lot more rain than what we get here. Now, the dominant animals that we find in the area, deer, black bear, bobcat, squirrels, things and so forth, those are the type of animals that you're going to find living in a temperate forest. And once again, a temperate forest is a forest that is mainly made up of trees with broad leaves. So another term for temperate forest, sometimes you see hear the term deciduous forest used in its stead. Our next biome is kind of a quirky one. It's called the northwestern coniferous forest. This is something that you find only in the states of Washington, northern Idaho, Oregon, and the northern part of California, and then of course the west side of Canada is where you're going to find it. Here's a picture of me hanging out in the northwest coniferous forest. This is at the Hoh rainforest, yeah, laugh, whatever, which is found on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. Now, coniferous means pine trees. So this is a specific biome for pine trees that you only find in like Washington, Oregon, and so forth. Well, what makes it special? Well, what's different about a northwest coniferous forest is the climate is very cool, okay? It rarely gets above 75 degrees in these forests. Rarely gets above 75 degrees, but it also doesn't get overly cold. It usually doesn't get below about 45 degrees. So you've only got about a 30-degree temperature swing between summer and winter. It stays pretty cool because these forests are found close to the Pacific Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean keeps them cool. Now, the other thing you got going on, lots and lots and lots of rain. These are pine trees growing here, and you can see there's all sorts of ferns and mosses and everything else that's growing along there with them because it is so wet. So that's the characteristics of your northwest coniferous forest. Cool temperatures, but lots of precipitation at the same time. The dominant thing you're going to find lots of pine trees. You'll also find some ferns and mosses and so forth that grow in the area. Dominant animals, bears, elk, deer, beaver, mountain lion. These are all things that, a lot of the same things that live in the forest in Washington. They're just a little bit different. I mean, live in the forest here in Utah. They're just a little bit different. Like, for instance, the average size of a bear in Washington is 125 pounds. They're about the size of a black lab, honestly. They're not very big. And that's because the type of forest they live in is a lot different from the forest that we have here. Our next biome is the boreal forest, and sometimes you hear the term taiga thrown out. Boreal forest or taiga. Here's an example of the boreal forest or the taiga. Now, the defining characteristics of the taiga is it's very cold and it's very dry. It's just barely enough, it gets really cold here, and there's just barely enough precipitation to keep some trees alive. Now, the only type of trees that you're going to find in this area are going to be pine trees, because here's what it comes down to. Pine trees can survive colder temperatures than broadleaf trees. They can also get by with less water than broadleaf trees. Broadleaf trees, because they have bigger leaves, they can do more photosynthesis. And so that means they can make more food. So any place where it's warm enough and there's enough water for broadleaf trees to grow, they will dominate and they will outcompete the pine trees. Pine trees really grow in places where it's too cold or it's too dry for a broadleaf tree to live. When you got both of those, too cold and too dry, that's the taiga. And basically the only plant that can live there is going to be pine trees. Dominant plants, as mentioned, pine trees, pine trees, pine trees. Dominant animals that live here, this is a great place for things like wolves, moose, and bear to live. Now, a lot of places in Utah classify as being the taiga. If you go to like the Uintas, the high Uintas, and all you find is, pine trees growing, that's going to classify as taiga. The mountains around here in Cache Valley, they're going to classify as taiga because it's too dry and it's too cold for anything else to live. If you're ever in a forest and all you see are pine trees, that would be considered a taiga biome. Our last biome we need to talk about is the tundra. The tundra. This is what you find in northern Alaska, northern Canada. This is what you find in Siberia. This is what the tundra looks like. You can see there's not a whole lot of plants that grow here. Now, the defining characteristic of the tundra is permafrost. Permafrost. That during the summer, the top layer of the soil will thaw out and plants can grow there for a second. But even during the middle of the summer, there is a part of the soil that never thaws. It is constantly frozen. And that's because if you look at this climate graph here, it tops out at 5 degrees Celsius. That's about between 45 and 50 degrees. That's as warm as it ever gets. And because it's only 45, 50 degrees, it never thaws out the entire layer of the soil. So any place you have permafrost where something is always frozen, even if it's August, we're talking about tundra. Other characteristics of the tundra, it's even colder than the taiga. Here you see, minus 25, even down to minus 30, and it's even drier than the taiga. That if it gets too cold, it really can't snow anymore if it gets too cold. And so that's why the tundra is extremely dry, because it's just too bloody cold for any precipitation to fall. Dominant plants that live here, mainly only mosses and lichens can live here. No trees can live here, no grasses can live here. Pretty much moss is the only thing that can survive for a short period of time, and that's it. And then the dominant animals, really not much stays in the tundra year-round. There's a few species of foxes and like polar bears and so forth that can live there year-round, but most things that live in the tundra are things like snow geese and so forth, Canada geese, that they show up there just for the summer, and then as soon as it starts to get cold, they get the freak out of there because there's not going to be any food there during the winter to keep them alive. So there really isn't a lot of animals that live there. Caribou are a noted exception because most of the things that live in the tundra, as soon as it gets cold, they migrate out of there. So to wrap all this up, let's go back and let's look at this map of the world and show you where some of these different biomes are at. So this dark blue up top, that is where you're going to find most of your tundra on the planet. These are areas where it is so cold that the soil never thaws out. The light blue, this is going to be your taiga. This is places where you only find pine trees living because it's either too cold or too dry for broadleaf trees to live. You can see a lot of Utah and Idaho classifies as being taiga is what you got going on. You can see the green here. These are our deciduous forests, our temperate forests. These are forests where it's warm enough and it's wet enough that we can have broadleaf trees living here. This brown, this is our temperate woodland or shrubland or chaparral. You see it here, like I said, around the Mediterranean and also here in the southern part of California. You can see where we've got our deserts. Here's the Sahara Desert, middle of Australia. You can see Arizona and Mexico, lots of desert going on right there. You can see our tropical forests right here in the Amazon and over here in Africa, and then Southeast Asia is going to be loaded with it. India is going to be our tropical dry forest, and then this brown right here, this is going to be our savanna. And then here, this kind of reddish brown here, that is going to be our temperate grassland. So those are the 8 major biomes that we're going to learn about in this class. You are going to be responsible for knowing each of the 8, have an idea of what type of plants live there, and most specifically know the climate for each of the biomes.